Open your mouth. Open your mouth. So we've been in this anointed series. How many of you all have been blessed by the anointed series? Come on. I've been blessed. Who feels anointed to go do something? Who feels anointed to conquer anything that tries to present itself to you? Man. So we've been talking about anointing, and we've been talking about honor, and that you are anointed to heal, you're anointed to speak into others. We've talked about honored and talking about taking a kingdom stance. And we as a ministry are getting ready to take a kingdom stance. We're taking a kingdom stance. We're making a faith move. So today we're going to talk about faith and expectations. And if you're taking notes, I want you to title this message, Faith It. Faith it. So we as a people are about to take a kingdom stance. And we're about to make a faith jump. So today, let's encourage our faith as we go into this next jump. So an announcement went out this week that we got a building. We got a building. Come on. We got a new building. We're going somewhere. We're going someplace new. We're going to the next. And it's a faith jump. It's a faith jump. You know, we talk about it, but do we faith it? We say it, but do we faith it? I know I've been guilty. I'll talk about myself. I've been guilty of not doing it unless I know I can do it. But God is calling us to go do something that only He can do. So we want everything to be logical. As human beings, we try to make everything logical. And it has to make sense. But God is saying He's ready for us to what? Faith it. Even when it doesn't make sense. When it doesn't look smart. Me and my family are about to take a faith move. We're about to faith it. We are faithing it. And I can't disclose everything because there's some important people that don't know yet, and I want to give them the respect of telling them myself. But it requires faith to take this next step. It's going to require faith for us to take this next step into this new building. But what we can't do, guess what? God can do. So what is faith it? And you can be seated. I'm going to make the switch. Can y'all hear me? Hallelujah. Can y'all hear me now? All right. All right. So what is faith it? Faith it means to do something, simply put, to do something in faith. Faith it means to do something in faith. So we aren't going to wait till we see it. We're not going to just talk about it. We're going to do it scared and just do it because we have faith. That's what faith it is. It's not always going to make sense. It's not always going to look pretty. It's all not always going to, the resources aren't always going to look like they're there. But that's what faithing it is. When Peter got out of the boat, he got out of the boat and walked on water. How many of you all would get out of a boat and walk on water? Not me. It was faith. Faithing it. It was faithing it. So what is faith? Faith means belief, firm persuasion, assurance, firm conviction, faithfulness. Faith is confidence in what we hope for and the assurance that the Lord is working. Even though we cannot see it. Even though you can't see it. You're not always going to see it. Stop waiting for you to be able to see it. I've come to preach to myself this morning. Faith knows that no matter what the situation is in our lives or someone else's, that the Lord is working in it. So let's talk about it. I'm going to read. I'm not going to ask you to stand because I'm going to read a lot. I'm going to read a lot. Is that all right if we read the Bible this morning? So I'm going to come out of the chapter, Hebrews 11. We're going to stay right there. That's all. We're just going to stay right in Hebrews 11. And I want y'all to kind of interact with me, all right? So they're going to put the scriptures on the screen. And you're going to see this, it was by faith, consistently repeated. So whenever we get to that part, it was by faith, can we all say it together? Can I get some interaction this morning? So let's practice it. I'm going to count to 3, and then we're going to say it was by faith together. All right, y'all ready? 1, 2, 3. It was by faith. All right, let's try it again. 1, 2, 3. It was by faith. If you're at home, say it out loud. It was by faith. Hebrews 11, verse number 1. Faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. We've all heard that scripture and read that scripture. How many of us read the entire chapter of Hebrews 11? It just, you could stay in Hebrews 11 all year long. Verse 2, through their faith, the people in days of old earned good reputation. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. Here we go. It was by faith that Abel brought a more acceptable offering to God than Cain did. Abel's offering gave evidence that he was a righteous man, and God showed his approval of his gifts. Although Abel is still long dead. Now listen to this. Abel is long dead. He still speaks to us by his example of faith. How many of you all want to, whenever you're dead and gone into the next world, that your faith is still speaking to somebody? Abel is long dead. He still speaks to us by his example of faith. Here we go again. It was by faith that Enoch was taken up to heaven without dying. He disappeared because God took him. For before he was taken up, he was known as a person who pleased God. And it is impossible to please God without faith. It's impossible to please God without faith. Anyone who wants, let me back up, make sure I didn't miss my spot. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists and that he rewards those who sincerely seek him. Verse number 7, it was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God who warned him about things that had never happened before. By his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world, and he received the righteousness that comes by faith. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith. For he was like a foreigner living in tents, and so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. Verse number 11, come on. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child, though she was barren and was too old. She believed that God would keep his promise, and so a whole nation came from this. One man who was good as dead. A nation with so many people that, like the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore, there was no way to count them. All these people died still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed it. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. Obviously, people who say such things are looking forward to a country they can call their own. Y'all ready to call Steel Creek your own? Verse 15, if they had longed for the country they came from, they could have gone back. We got to leave this behind. You got to leave this behind, or you'll end up wanting to stay stuck here. They had to leave that behind. Verse number 17, it was by faith that Abraham offered up Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son. God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son Isaac, even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. Verse number 20, y'all ready? It was by faith that Isaac promised promised blessings for the future to his sons, Jacob and Esau. Verse number 21, it was by faith that Jacob, when he was old and dying, blessed each Joseph's sons and bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. Verse number 22, it was by faith. Y'all see a common theme? That Joseph, when he was about to die, said confidently that the people of Israel would leave Egypt. That the people of Restoration Place would leave Fort Mill. He even commanded them to take his bones with them when they left. Verse 23, it was by faith that Moses' parents hid him for 3 months. When he was born, they saw that God had given them an unusual child, and they were not afraid to disobey the king's command. Verse 24, it was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. Verse 27, it was by faith that Moses left the land of Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He kept faith. He kept on going because he kept his eyes on the one who is invisible. Verse 28, it was by faith that Moses commanded the people of Israel to keep the Passover and to sprinkle blood of the on the doorposts, so that the angel of death would not kill the firstborn sons. Come on. Verse 29, it was by faith. Y'all gonna remember this today. It was by faith that the people of Israel went right through the Red Sea as though they were on dry ground. But when the Egyptians tried to follow, they were all drowned. Verse 30, it was by faith that the people of Israel marched around the Jericho for 7 days and the walls came crashing down. Verse 31, it was by faith that Rahab and the prostitute was not destroyed when the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of faith. The faith of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned into strength. You may say I'm weak in something. I can't do this, but it's turned into strength. Women received their loved ones back again from death, but others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. Some were jeered, and their backs were cut open with whips. Others were chained in prison. Some died by stoning. Some were sawed in half, and others were killed with the sword. Some went about wearing skins of sheep and goats, destitute and oppressed and mistreated. They were too good for this world, wandering over deserts and mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. All these people earned a good reputation because of their faith. Yet none of them received all that God had promised, for God has something better in mind for us, so that they would not reach perfection without us. I got another one. It was by faith that Restoration Place left Fort Mill, South Carolina to go to the new area and Still Creek area, foreign to them, to reach a harvest that this place cannot hold. So we have all these stories of faith. And God has sent me here to ask you, what is your story? What is your story? What is your story that has given you a good reputation? What is your story that's going to give you a good reputation? What are you toiling over that you are needing to faith it? God is positioning us in a place that requires our expectations and faith to come up, because restoration has a story. You have a story. I have a story. We all have a story that they're going to talk about when we leave this earth. And it is by faith that we're going to accomplish everything that we're going to walk into. By faith. Not because you can do it. Not because you have the abilities. Not because you have the strength. Not because you're able to do it in your own might. It's going to be by what? Faith. We're going to have to faith it. We have a story. We have a community. We have a city. We have a family. We have a region. We have a generation to change. Faithing it comes with some prices, but it also makes an impact on the lives of many. So let's discuss faithing it. We have to understand it. So I've simplified this to 8 points. For the easy note takers that like to take notes, it's just going to be 8 points. Did I say 5? 8 points. It's 8 of them. And we're going to dissect what faithing it contains and what it all is required, okay? So that we can walk out of here knowing what we're getting ourselves into. All right? So faithing it, number one, faithing it changes lives. Faithing it changes lives. So that step that you're going to make that you cannot do, that you are going to have to rely on Jesus Christ to get you through, it's going to change lives. This next jump, this next faith move is going to change some lives. There are some people in that region that are not in this region that are going to be changed. That building is bigger so that more people can come to be changed. Faithing it is going to change lives. It may seem small to you. That simple little thing that is so small that God is unctioning you to do is going to change somebody's life. It may be as simple as picking up the phone and calling your grandmother that you hadn't spoken to in a while and asking, how can I pray for you? Faithing it changes lives. Every one of us in this room is a product of faith. And every one of our lives have been changed as a result of faith. Somebody else's faith. Faithing it changes life. I would not be here if Pastor Dexter and Genette Howard wouldn't have stepped out on faith and started a ministry. We wouldn't be here if they hadn't stepped out on faith and started this ministry. This room wouldn't be here if they wouldn't have left Northwest Arkansas and started this ministry. It was faith that changed our lives. Somebody else's faith. So think about it. Somebody's life is attached to your faith. A loved one's life is attached to your faith. A business is attached to your faith. Your finances are attached to your faith. It requires faith. Faith changes lives. There's this a story of an individual in Northwest Arkansas, and their story is just so powerful. And they had reached a place in their life where they had literally given up. They had literally said, I do not want to live anymore. And they told us they were ready to give up, and they didn't want to live anymore, but they tried God. They tried out coming to a block service, a youth and young adult service. And now their life has been completely transformed and turned around, and they are happy about life. They are full of life. Now they are changing lives. But if we never faithed it and went to do these things, that life may not have ever been reached. Faithing it changes lives. What we're about to embark on is going to change lives. So hold on to that. that somebody's life is attached to this faith move. We see this with all the stories. Moses, by faith, brought the Israelites out of oppression. There is a person that is oppressed, that's in oppression, that needs a shift in their life. And it's going to require you. It's going to require us to faith it. Not talk about it. Not pretend it. Not think about it. But faith it. Go and do it by faith. Could you imagine what would happen to the Israelites if Moses didn't act out of faith and go and faith it? What could have transpired in the world? Faithing it changes lives. Number 2, faithing it requires availability. Faithing it requires availability. There's going to be times where our pastors or our leaders or the people are going to need our availability. We are all going to need you. I'm going to need you. We're going to need each other. Faithing it requires availability. You have to be available. There are going to be things that come up and try to take your time and attention away from the story of faith, trying to steal your availability. It's going to have to require some prioritization. You're going to have to be skilled in your priorities and prioritize what is right and what is first and what is true, and that's Jesus. No longer you're not going to be able to wait till the end of the day to get to Jesus if I get to him. Your availability is needed. What if Moses wasn't available to lead the people out of Egypt? I'm not available today, God. I got to go, eat with the Pharaoh. Not available. Faithing it requires availability. You're going to have to be available. It's not going to be something you want to do, but be available. Faithing it requires availability. Number 3, faithing it requires great expectations. Great expectations. Lift your mind, lift your eyes, lift your expectations. What are you expecting God for? Lift it up. It requires great expectations. Let's go to Hebrews 11, verse 1. We're going to go back to the beginning. Faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. You can't see it. Stop waiting on being able to see it. That is not faith. You're not going to be able to see it. It's not going to make sense. Stop waiting on it to make sense to you. There's some things that are never birthed because we're waiting on it to make sense. Restoration right now isn't what it's going to be. You got to see the unseeable. The 20,000 is right here in this room. It's in you. The 20,000 is in you, Faith. The 20,000 is in us. Each of you have an impact. You have a reach. You're going to reach somebody. But you must see the seats full. You have to see the community that needs restoration. You have to lift your eyes. You gotta raise your expectations. Stop looking at what's around you. Stop looking at what you see right in front of you. You can't see it. Faith is something that you cannot see. It's not going to look what it looks like. We must get our thinking and expectations up. We can't go into this new building with low expectations. We can't go into this new building with negative thinking. We must go into this new building with great expectations. We got to leave the old mindset behind. Fort Mill, South Carolina, they're going to come with us. Don't worry about this. You got to get your expectations up. Your sights are got to be up here. Get rid of the negative thinking. The stinking thinking has got to go. Get your expectations up. Get them up. Anything that is trying to come at you and speak negativity and trying to pull you down and trying to get you in this place of, I don't want to do it. You got to get it at the root. Kill it at the root. Cut it off. We can't expect the people to come and enjoy themselves if we're humming, drumming about everything. We have to lead by example. We have to get our expectations up. We got to see the thousands. We got to get our sights up. Great expectations. Faithing it requires great expectations. Number 4, faithing it requires obedience. Faithing it requires obedience. Let's go into verse 8 and 9. Verse number 8. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as his inheritance. He went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith. For he was like a foreigner living in tents. So did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promises. Abraham had to obey God. What has God told you? Ask yourself, what has God told you that you're not obeying right now? What has God told you that you're not obeying? What is it that you have been told? God has told you something. Obey. Faithing it requires obedience. We're going to have to obey the word. Whatever God is telling us and speaking to our hearts, we have to obey him. We have to obey those unctions. We have to obey it because remember, faithing it changes lives. Faithing it requires obedience. Number 5, faithing it requires trust. It's going to require something that you cannot do in your own ability. You're going to have to trust God, the invisible. We read it in the scripture just now. They trusted somebody that was invisible, that wasn't there. I remember my daughter, some of y'all know this story, but others may not. My daughter was born with a congenital heart defect, and they told us that she would, if she's going to live, she's going to live a very hard life. She's going to have to go through all these surgeries. When she gets to a certain age, she's probably going to need a heart transplant. It's going to be hard. And I remember that being the most crippling place I could ever be as a father, as my first child. The father of my first child, not being able to do anything. And no control. No control whatsoever. And I had to simply trust. Trust God. I had to trust God. And I remember, them telling us how they're going to do the operation, how they're going to, and she's been through 3 of them. And what they were going to do, the second operation, they were going to stop her heart and hook her up to this machine. And I'm sitting there having a dialogue with God. God, how is that heart going to start back up if it doesn't want to? I had to just trust him. And yes, it doesn't feel good. But whenever you see the execution of that trust and the trust that is not failed, because we serve a God that is not going to fail your trust. We're looking at God and expecting God to be like a person, and God is not a person. God is the God. He is faithful. He will not break your trust. Anytime we blame God, it's because we don't understand what he is up to, and we try to blame him for something that we think is supposed to happen. But God is not going to, he's faithful. It requires trust. But God, to be the glory, she is here. She's 8 years old. She's in 2nd grade, and she's thriving. She's living her life. God did not fail me. You're going to have to trust. It's going to require trust. Faithing it requires trust. Number 6, faithing it requires, this is the one that, this hurts a little bit. Faithing it requires sacrifice. Faithing it requires sacrifice. There are going to be things you're going to have to sacrifice. Some desires you're going to have to sacrifice in order to walk by faith. Abraham was about to give up his son. The promise that God had for him and gave him. The promise. Abraham was going to sacrifice something pretty major. God's not sitting here asking you to put your son on a stone and chop his head off. God's not asking us to do any of that. But it's going to require a sacrifice. Can you imagine if God came to you and told you, take your take your son, the same thing I promised you. What is that thing that God promised you that you're holding on to and you've made it yours? What if he came to you and said, sacrifice that? Are you going to be able to sacrifice it? It may be something similar. It may be the TV. I don't know. It may be a relationship. Are you going to be able to sacrifice it for God? Hebrews 11:17-19. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice. There's that word, sacrifice. When God was testing him, Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. Even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted, Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring it back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. I promise you, whatever you got to sacrifice, God can give you way more. God will fill you up to an overflow where you will be like, man, that's not even a sacrifice anymore. You might as well get over it and give it up. What is it that you need to give up? Make that mental note. What is it that you need to give up? Just like Abraham, it'll hurt only for a minute, but trusting God that what you are giving up, he can return. There are going to be things you're going to desire to do. There are going to be things that you're going to desire to have. There are going to be things that you're going to have to sacrifice. I'm talking about here in the near future. You're going to have to make the decision. Am I going to sacrifice my Saturday morning that I wanted to go do my running around? Come on, somebody. Let's not overcomplicate it. It could be something very simple. Am I going to have to sacrifice my All-American night on Netflix? It's going to require sacrifice. Faithing it requires sacrifice. Sacrifice hurts, but it's a good hurt. It hurts the flesh. Many of us aren't faithing it because we're allowing our flesh to have control. We're not willing to sacrifice anything for our flesh. I've been guilty of it. I talk about myself. Fast and pray. This is a good time to start fasting and praying. If you hadn't been fasting and praying, start fasting and praying. Begin to sacrifice now. Start cutting that flesh up now. Start getting rid of those things that you know that you need to get rid of now. Sacrifice. Number 7, we're almost done. Faithing it takes work. Faithing it takes work. Hebrews 11, verse 7. It was by faith that Noah built a large boat to save his family from the flood. He obeyed God, who warned him about things that had never happened before. By his faith, Noah condemned the rest of the world and received righteousness that comes by faith. You think it was easy spending all that time building that boat? Some scholars say that Noah, it took him 55 to 75 years, depending on the studies. It's 75 years building something for something that has never happened before. Think about it. It's never rained before. And Noah is sitting here building this boat for 75 years while people call him crazy. He's the town crazy. Look at this crazy, building this large boat for something that we've never seen before. Why go into a big building when we've never seen this building full? It takes work. Noah had to build it. He knew he had to build this big boat to hold everything that God is going to bring. It takes work. 75 years laboring, building this boat for something that nobody's ever seen before. James 2:17 says, faith without works is what? Is dead. Faith requires work. We can't go into Steel Creek expecting to change lives, expecting to bring restoration to that community without expecting to do some work. That's why it's important to sacrifice so that we can go and do the work. It's going to require work, but it's going to be a great thing because faithing it changes lives. Not just other people's lives, it changes your life too. Faithing it changes lives. So let's go to work. I'm ready to go to work. Let's get ready to go to work. Faithing it requires work. That's why it's important to start sacrificing that flesh, to start getting in the closet and fasting and praying so you can be prepared to go to work. Number 8, and I'm done. This has been one of the, probably is always a challenge. I mean, it's all a challenge, but faithing it requires being set apart. You're not supposed to blend in. We are not supposed to blend in. Hebrews 11, we read it. Hebrews 11, verse 24. It was by faith that Moses, when he grew up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppressions of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own treasures of Egypt. For he was looking ahead to his great reward. Faithing it requires being set apart. Look at the reward ahead. Look at the treasures ahead. We can't get caught up in the minutia of the world. We cannot blend in with the world. We cannot partake in what rhetoric the world is trying to produce. We have to be set apart. We have to be set apart. We can no longer join in with the world's mess. It can be tough trying to live by faith when you're trying to blend in with the world. You know, when your friends are going this way and you want to join them, but you can't really do what you know God has told you to do because you're too busy joining them. It don't work. You have to be set apart. You cannot identify with something you are not. You're no more blending in. Stand out. Be who you have been called to be. Be who you've been called to be. Be you. Be exactly who God called you to be. Don't worry about what they're going to say. Noah was called all sorts of names. Hebrews 11, verse 35. Women received their loved ones back again from death. But others were tortured, refusing to turn from God in order to be set free. Don't choose to blend in. They refused to be set apart, and as a result, they were tortured. They wanted to blend in. We could keep going on and on and on and on. I actually encourage you all to continue to meditate on Hebrews 11, and I'm finished. Continue. Y'all can stand. Let's stand to our feet. You can go on and on with as many stories about faithing it and what all faithing it requires. Faithing it can hurt. Faithing it can be unbelievable. But as Miss Deborah spoke to earlier, don't shrink back. Now's not the time to shrink back. It may not look like what you think it's going to look like, but it's faithing it. God is saying, faith it.